Hi guys, I hope you're doing really well. My name is Sarah and welcome to What the Horror, the channel where we talk about horror movies old and new. Today we are revisiting the concept of the monthly recap episode. For those of you who have been with me for a while, then you will know what these are, as I did do a couple of these about 2 years ago and then again about a year ago, but in differing formats. But if you're newer here and you don't know what these are, then these are the episodes where at the end of each month I will recap everything that I have watched, including TV shows and films. Basically everything logged on my Letterboxd and a few extras. I wanted to revisit this concept because while I do review newly released films here on the channel and I cover other films in great depth, in terms of my own personal opinions, I don't review older, random and non-horror films on the channel. So I wanted to begin doing these again as they're episodes that I personally love to watch from other people, and it gives me an opportunity, an outlet, to let you know my personal thoughts on the films that I have been watching. These episodes will be broken down into the TV series I watched and then the films, just going in chronological order through what I've logged on Letterboxd. I'll talk a bit about each of them and share what I rated them out of a 5-star system, although I don't tend to rate the TV shows and documentaries. And at the end, I'll also pick a film or series out as my own personal pick of the month. Alright, so starting off with the TV shows. First up, I watched a couple of the newly released true crime documentaries on Netflix. The first one is American Nightmare. This 3-part series follows the tragic case of Denise Huskins, who in March 2015 was kidnapped from the home she shared with her boyfriend Aaron Quinn. The Vallejo Police Department and the FBI assumed the kidnapping was a hoax staged by Huskins and Quinn, and Huskins was labelled the real Gone Girl by the media. Netflix is inundated with true crime documentaries, and all of them to varying degrees of quality. This one, however, was a pretty strong one. While at 3 episodes long, it is shorter than some of these docuseries. It does still spend a little too long on certain details in my opinion, but this was well made and it's a heartbreaking case at the centre of it that I think is important to know about, especially certain aspects to how the case and the victims were treated by various people and establishments. And what makes this one stand apart is how in the beginning it makes the audience almost complicit in some of the negative attitude towards the young couple. Then we have Can I Tell You a Secret on the other end of the scale in terms of quality. This 2-part series follows 3 women and their accounts of being terrorised by the same online stalker for a number of years. While the case itself is an interesting case study of the dangers of social media and online safety, the docuseries itself is, in my opinion, guilty of over-dramatising. What happened to these women is horrendous enough without the dramatics. In terms of production, it relies very heavily on stock footage, in particular one of electricity flowing down wires overhead. That one, it feels like it's used every 5 minutes. And of course there was the moment where I actually thought they were going to blame what he was doing on his being autistic. Even he himself uses it as an excuse for what he did. Thankfully, they had a developmental psychologist on who is autistic herself, who basically said he didn't do this because he was autistic, and being autistic doesn't excuse the pain and fear that he caused to so many women over so many years, and how it really feeds into negative stereotypes for people with autism. Then we have some more fun entries. First up, we have the X-Files. This is my 3rd attempt at watching the entirety of the series. The first was when I was about late teens, early 20s, but at the time I was severely restricted by what was available on the TV. Then I tried again in 2020, but for some reason I decided to start it in October while I was already watching The Haunting of Bly Manor and doing 31 Days of Halloween. Something had to give and it was the X-Files. But I do love the X-Files. It was one of my mum's favourite TV shows, and so I've been around it since I was a kid. We had the first film on VHS and I repeatedly watched that despite not knowing the wider story, but I've never seen the whole body of work. The first series was really strong, introducing us to the characters and following a Monster of the Week format, while also being clear from the get-go that aliens do in fact exist. There's humour in there, some pretty spooky episodes, and some interesting monsters, but I did find the dynamic between Mulder and Scully a little irritating in the beginning, because no matter what Mulder said or believed, Scully would always argue the opposite, and it was irritating. I'm currently coming to the end of season 2. I've got a couple of episodes left. This season hasn't been as good in my opinion. Gillian Anderson was pregnant for some of the filming, so I think that they had to work around that and perhaps didn't do what they had originally intended to do. It feels fragmented, and they make this bizarre decision to change Mulder as a character for a handful of the episodes, and it makes him really unlikable. But from what I've seen, it seems like they've changed him back and they're making more headway with the overarching story. So I'm excited to see what happens going into season 3. All I would say is get ready for the X-Files to appear on these recaps for quite a few months. I also rewatched the adaptation of Harlan Coburn's book Stay Close on Netflix. These series are good if you like a little bit of mystery, drama and intrigue. And finally, for TV shows, I've started rewatching Star Trek The Next Generation. This was an absolute staple of my childhood, and it's been interesting revisiting it as an adult because there is actually so much more humour and sexuality in it than I remember as a kid. But so far it has been a genuine joy to watch, not least because I love to laugh at Riker's constant posing and straddling. Okay, so now we'll just go through what I have logged on Letterboxd. If you're not following me on Letterboxd, then there is a link in the description box below for you. I love this app. I try to log everything I watch. I love to go on and log, review, check out other people's reviews, and I tend to be a prolific list maker on it as well, often making accompanying lists of episodes I have released here on YouTube. So first for films, on the 4th of February, I rewatched The Ring, released in 2002. I rewatched this for work as I started researching for my upcoming Ringu versus The Ring episode. There's not much I can say about The Ring in terms of introducing it to you or explaining it to you. I'm sure most of you have already watched it. The Ring, in my opinion, remains the best remake of an Asian horror film, and perhaps that is because this is the film that kick-started that phase, and so it was at the forefront. It was purely creatively driven rather than trying to recapture the critical and financial success that later entries try to do. While Ringu remains my favourite of the two, which we'll come to in a moment, over the years and through rewatches I have really grown to love the remake, and on this last rewatch, watching it in such minute detail really highlighted how strong a film it is. It doesn't scare me like the original still does, but I do love the look and aesthetic of the remake, and while I find the end scene less effective in terms of creep factor, I do really enjoy the added action to it, the use of the space in Noah's loft, the force and speed with which Samara comes out of the TV. I rated The Ring 4.5 stars out of 5 and a little heart. Then one day while I was editing, I had a craving for a shark horror movie, for a creature feature, so I decided to try out Deep Fear on Netflix. Released in 2023, this film follows a young woman who takes a solo trip aboard her yacht, but it takes a terrifying turn when she encounters 3 drug traffickers stranded in the ocean. Before long, she finds herself in shark-infested water fighting for her life. This was not a good choice, and while you could say that my attention was split between the film and editing, I'm not sure my full attention would have helped. I'm not even sure I would have made it through the entire thing. I don't mind a bad shark movie now and again. I understand there is very little new ground you can break in a shark film where you're following a creature following its natural instincts. You pretty much know what you're getting. But for a shark film, it was severely lacking in sharks. They're hardly on the screen at all. Instead, you're left with a story that is essentially cliffhanger, but in the ocean, and contains a beautiful woman being given as many opportunities as possible to bend over to pick something up, while her character deals with, unresolved issues and past trauma. I gave it a go, but I gave Deep Fear a rating of 1 out of 5 stars. Then I rewatched Ringu from 1999, the Japanese original to The Ring. Many of you will already know, but in case you weren't aware, Ringu is one of my favourite horror films and films in general, so it is always a joy to revisit this film and this world. As with The Ring, I rewatched this for my research for my comparison episode of the two, the original and the remake. I watched the film and then the majority of the special features on my Blu-ray. I have the Arrow edition, so believe me when I tell you there are lots of special features to wade through. While I do love The Ring, Ringu has the advantage for me and is, in my opinion, a near perfect film. It was made on a relatively small budget, but it just made such a big impact on both the Japanese and American film industry. The story itself is a wonderful mesh of old traditions mixed with the fears of future development, and I love that the original leans far more into the supernatural side of things, especially with its characters and their abilities. The settings and acting are all fantastic and still to this day scares me. Ringu has perhaps one of the most iconic entrances of an antagonist or villain, and in turn introduced us to one of my favourite horror villains. And one that is terrifying, but at the same time heartbreakingly tragic and wronged. I gave Ringu 5 out of 5 stars and a heart. Then I watched my first holiday horror of the month with Valentine, released in 2001. This was a watch for some content on my Patreon page. I watched it and recorded a commentary track for my Patreon members to listen to as they watched along. If you're not already a member and would like to join, then there is a link in the description box below. Valentine follows 5 friends as they're targeted and killed off by a masked killer. Valentine is a film that I have rewatched many times over the years, and one that I've had a strange relationship with in the way that I rate it. One year I'll rate it 2 stars, the next 3.5. And I think it's because Valentine is not one of the greatest films ever made, but it is enjoyable and a strong entry in the holiday horror catalogue. I will admit that there is some questionable character writing, in particular with Kate's neighbour, but for the most part it's aged quite well for an early 2000 film. It does have a rating of 2.6 on Letterboxd, but I think that I have come to accept this one as an underrated gem, and I rated it 3.5 out of 5 stars and a heart. Then I watched The Bye-Bye Man, released in 2017. This film follows 3 college students who unwittingly unleash the supernatural entity known as the Bye-Bye Man. This is one that I watched with my mini-me because we have this habit of finding low-rated teen horror films that are based on or around some sort of internet urban legend or that have a Ring-like story. Things like Slender Man or Polaroid. And the Bye-Bye Man had been sat on my shelf for a couple of years, so I thought that it was finally time to check it out. I will say that the first third of the film had some really nice shots, including one of a bedroom layout and of a corridor. They were very reminiscent of Amityville Horror and The Shining. There was also one scare that I genuinely enjoyed and genuinely made my skin crawl. I won't say what it is exactly, but it does involve 2 small doors in the bedroom. However, after that what we got was a rather weak and generic film. But I do love that Lee Winnell is in it, in his little sweater vest. I rated The Bye-Bye Man 2 out of 5 stars, but honestly it could have been 1.5. Then we have another first time watch for me, and that is Flashdance from 1983. I love dance movies like Footloose and Dirty Dancing, but I had never seen Flashdance, so when I was able to pick it up as a double feature DVD with both Flashdance and Footloose, I snapped it up. Flashdance follows Alex, a young woman juggling 2 jobs, a welder during the day and a dancer at night, all the while aspiring to become a successful ballet dancer. I found this one a little odd at times, mostly due to some of the acting choices, but for the most part this was a fun watch. In particular during the dance sequences at the nightclub where the women are dressed up in these creative costumes done up with flamboyant makeup with incredibly choreographed dances. Perhaps one of the most iconic is when Alex does a dance that includes her pulling a chain that drops water onto her. It has been parodied lots of times, as well as the dance audition. What stood out to me the most about Flashdance though is how genuinely sad it can be at times, as we follow multiple characters all trying to navigate through life's ups and downs while desperately trying to hold on to their dreams. I gave Flashdance 3.5 stars out of 5. Then we have my second holiday watch of the month with My Bloody Valentine from 1981. This is a yearly rewatch for me. It's definitely in my list of favourite horror films, perhaps not in the top 20, but it is one that I love, and I always try to revisit it either on or around Valentine's Day. I'm also lucky enough that the copy of the film I have is one that had the kills fully restored after censoring butchered the original release, so I'm able to enjoy it how it was supposed to be enjoyed. I think I've talked about this one before quite a few times, so you've probably heard me talk before about my love for the aesthetic of My Bloody Valentine, that juxtaposition of the mining town and the delicate pinks and reds of the Valentine's decorations, and how the miner balances the violence of his pickaxe with the gifts he leaves behind, like the heart-shaped box of chocolates. The miner is also one of my favourite horror villains in terms of appearance, and I'm still disappointed that in the UK we just don't really get anything My Bloody Valentine or the miner themed. I gave My Bloody Valentine 4 out of 5 stars and a heart. Then I rewatched Insidious Chapter 2, released in 2013. I've talked about this film before in a ranking, so I won't talk at length about it here. I've been honest in the past that I prefer this one to the first one. I'm not a huge fan of James Wan's direction of the first, and to an extent of the second, in terms of the audio. The loud sounds become increasingly irritating on rewatches, but with Chapter 2, I love the Scooby Gang aspect to it when Specs and Tucker go off investigating with Lorraine and Carl. And the other day, I had a craving for it. So I gave it a rewatch and I rated it 4 out of 5 stars and a heart. Then, as it was half term here in the UK, I took my mini-me to the cinema to watch the new Illumination film Migration. But before Migration, they showed a short film called Mooned, which comes chronologically between Despicable Me and Despicable Me 2. It follows the criminal Vector after he had been stranded in space at the end of Despicable Me. Not much to say about this one, except that I think it is a really, really solid short film. It's tightly written with a couple of laughs in it, and I rated it 4 out of 5 stars with a heart. Then we actually watched Migration. This is a children's animated film that follows a family of ducks who decide to leave the safety and comfort of their pond to migrate to Jamaica after hearing tales of far-flung places from a migrating family of ducks. I truly believe that you are never too old for children's films or animated films. That's why my mini-me and I still watch them. There is something so wholesome and heartwarming about a lot of them, and this was no different. While being predictable in a lot of places, the animation was beautiful at times, and the overall message of the film was a really sweet one. I rated it 3.5 stars out of 5. Then we have another first time watch as I checked out Suitable Flesh on Shudder. Suitable Flesh was released in 2023 and follows a once highly esteemed psychiatrist helplessly watch as her life spirals into a nightmare of supernatural hysteria and gruesome deaths. One night I had some free time, and as it had got dark, I wanted to use that time to cuddle up with a horror film. Now, I am notoriously bad at picking films to watch just off the cuff. It takes so much preparation. That's why I use Letterboxd so much, because it has the watch list section, plus you can make your own lists. So I often make private lists of films I need to watch for work and films I want to watch in the immediate. So I was amazed as anyone that I just hopped onto Shudder, freely scrolled through the lists of films, and then made a decision to watch one. I landed on Suitable Flesh because I liked the look of the poster design. It reminded me a lot of 70s horror films, which I love, and I was intrigued that Barbara Crampton was in it. And honestly, I thought I would enjoy this a lot more than I did after I read the synopsis on Shudder, because I really do enjoy a cult horror movie, but ultimately this was just okay for me. It wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it never quite reached what I hope it would. There was just something that didn't work for me. But I always like to give stuff a go because I could have ended up loving it. But in the end though, I rated it 3 out of 5 stars. Then I watched Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, released in 2021. This one has been on my Netflix watch list ever since it was put up, but I just was never in the mood for it. But as there was an alert to say it would be leaving soon, I decided to finally check it out. Welcome to Raccoon City is another imagining and adaptation of the video games of the same name, this time following Chris and Claire Redfield and a handful of other characters from the games as they get caught up in a zombie outbreak in the dying Raccoon City. While I've never been a hardcore player of the games, I did grow up around them as my brother was a huge fan, and I've also seen all of the Milla Jovovich entries. So I was really interested to see what they did with this entry, especially as this one had been marketed as an accurate adaptation, something that the other series of films were never able to claim. But to say it was pushed as that, I don't know what on earth was going on in this one, because the majority of the characters were not accurately portrayed. The Leon, Jill, Chris, Claire and Wesker of this film were almost completely unrecognisable. They now have Claire and Chris as estranged siblings, whereas in the games their relationships was their driving force, always to protect each other. Leon is now weak and useless, and Wesker is now an anti-hero with some forced romantic link to Jill. I did like moments of the film, like the Stars team entering the Spencer mansion, but this was overall disappointing. I really hope that there was more enjoyment out of this for hardcore fans who could spot all of the Easter eggs, but for me, I rated it 2 out of 5 stars. Then I watched another non-horror and another film that has been on my watch list on Netflix for months. I think that I was just trying to clear out my list this month and finally watch films that I've had hanging around for ages. But I finally watched Spencer, released in 2021. This film covers a critical weekend over Christmas when Princess Diana decided her marriage to Prince Charles wasn't working and she needed to veer from a path that put her in line to one day be queen. I think part of the reason I held off on this one for a while is because I had recently completed the Crown TV series and I wanted to put some distance between that portrayal of Diana and Kristen Stewart's, which is phenomenal, by the way. She was nominated for the Oscars Best Actress Award for this performance, and it doesn't surprise me. As I said in my review on Letterboxd, I was a little delirious while watching this, as I was in the process of moving from a headache to a migraine, and I was in immense pain. So it was a rather bizarre experience because I had no idea the story format this film took. While it's a period fictional telling of a real event, it is also a very dark psychological film, and it plays out like a Shakespearean play, whilst also feeling like the story was being told through dance, like a ballet or an opera. Because of difficulties that Diana struggled with in her life, there are moments in the film that are distressing to watch, but it was a very unique way to tell the story and was beautifully done and beautifully shot, always putting Diana at the front and centre, keeping the rest of the royals in the background, and sometimes not even on the screen. I rated Spencer 4 out of 5 stars. Then we have another rewatch as I revisited Barbarian, my favourite horror film of 2022. You guys have probably already seen Barbarian, but if you haven't, I will give a very basic synopsis of what the film is about. It follows Tess, a woman who, while in town for a job interview, books into an Airbnb, but once she arrives, she finds it has been double booked and a strange man is already staying there. I love this film. This is another of my favourite horror films, and I only realised how much so on this rewatch. Seeing as how I haven't watched it since 2022, I was not only happy to revisit it, but also to discover that it is just as good on a rewatch, if not a slightly different viewing experience. Let's just say my jaw wasn't on the floor this time. I rewatched Barbarian for an episode here on the channel where I look at the villains of the film, so I'll leave a link to that here if you haven't seen it already. I also did a deep dive and plot breakdown back in 22, which I'll leave a link to in the description box. In that one, I go more into depth about the messages and the themes of the film. That is one thing that I love about Barbarian. Not only does it feel like a classic old school horror movie with amazing scares, it also has so much to say, but manages to do it in such a natural and realistic way. It's not shoehorned in or done in a way that completely misses the point of the message it's trying to convey. I'm looking at you men. If you know my thoughts on this film already, then you'll know that I think it's an almost perfect horror film, but there is one aspect that still holds it back for me, even now after being able to understand that aspect a little better, so I rated this 4.5 stars out of 5 and a little heart. Then at the weekend I wanted something to watch while I dug my way out of an enormous pile of ironing, and while I didn't want to be taxed too much mentally, I decided on The Possession of Hannah Grace, released in 2018. It is yet another possession movie, but it is one with a refreshing change of not being focused around the religious side or on exorcisms. I appreciate when a film tries to do something different, and this film has to be credited with that. However, it becomes very obvious very early on that this film follows a lot of lazy horror tropes and ends up being guilty of lazy writing. For example, I predicted we would cut at the beginning to our lead character running really fast, and while we didn't get that, we did cut to her punching really fast. While our lead is getting a tour of her new job in the hospital morgue, we come across a hand dryer, a lift, and motion activated lights, all of which I knew would come back as a scare later. And they all did. Our lead also has, unresolved trauma, and we have a "there was someone behind the door" jump scare. It wasn't the worst film I've ever seen, and I think some people were a little unfair in the ratings on Letterboxd, but it certainly wasn't groundbreaking either, and most of the reviews, if they weren't ripping it apart, were highlighting similarities to multiple other horror films. I rated The Possession of Hannah Grace 2 out of 5 stars. Then I made a start on my watch list of Dracula films as research for my upcoming Evolution of Dracula episode here on the channel. You know, the one I've been promising since last April. It's coming. And to kick off, I watched Nosferatu, released in 1922. I said in my review that this just felt like an important and historic watch because Nosferatu had such a lasting impact and influence on the film industry in terms of production. It feels like it's one of those films that all fans of horror should try at some point, and I'm so glad I did, because for a film well over 100 years old, it is still just as effective, and I was pleasantly surprised to find a couple of moments of humour in it as well, something I wasn't expecting. This was my first journey into silent film, and I really enjoyed it. It was interesting to see Dracula, or Nosferatu, portrayed as a more creature-like man than the typical image we have of Bela Lugosi. I rated Nosferatu 4 out of 5 stars and a heart. And finally for this month, speaking of Bela Lugosi, I rewatched Dracula from 1931. And straight off the bat, I want to say that I am baffled by the fact that I originally rated this one 2 out of 5 stars. I don't know what I was thinking 3.5 years ago. I just don't. Perhaps it's down to me just growing as a horror fan and as a critiquer of films through this channel, but I adored it this time round, and I think that it is a masterpiece. Not quite perfect, but certainly worth more than 2 stars. I know that this version of Dracula doesn't hit the action highs that some of its counterparts do, like Frankenstein or the Wolfman or the Invisible Man, actually thinking about it, that whole train sequence. And there are scenes that feel as though it has been lifted off of the stage, and that can lend the film to feeling a little slow, which isn't going to be for everybody. But, the performances of Bela Lugosi as Dracula and Dwight Frye as Renfield are unsurpassable. Incredible. And I said in my review that because this film was released in that transitional period between the silent film and the talkies, there are still some scenes that are very low on dialogue, and so they rely heavily on facial expressions and body language, and it just gives it this otherworldly feel. This time round, I rated Dracula 4 out of 5 stars and a heart. Well, that is it for my February wrap-up of everything that I watched. I hope you enjoyed it. As for my pick of the month, I'm going to go with Ringu. It is the only 5-star rating from this month, a near perfect film in my opinion, and one of my personal favourites. I would highly, highly recommend it. If you're new here, then don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because as my usual release date is a Sunday, in the following weeks I will be releasing extra episodes as we have the release of both Lisa Frankenstein and Imaginary in the UK, so I will be releasing my reviews of those. And if you would like to join these names here, there is a link in my Patreon page in the description box below. But in the meantime, thank you as always for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye.